Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT show, The Nation Talks. I'm your host, John Drummond, and I'm with you for the next almost an hour now. I hope this is your regular tuning in at 7 o'clock most Wednesdays, because as we always guarantee you, you're in for a treat. You're in for a treat. And also, we'll try and take your questions as we come along. That's one of the big advantages about being live. There's an immediacy about being live, because you're always concerned that something might go wrong and it might be what you say might be misunderstood. Which brings me to an interesting photograph. Look at this clip from the G7 conference. We've called it here in the studio, "He Stoops to Conquer." And this is our esteemed Prime Minister, who appears to be cleaning President Trump's boots. I'm sure that's not the case. I'm sure it's the case that that either deliberately or inadvertently, the president, who is in advanced years, dropped some of his terribly important papers. Anyway, luckily our Prime Minister, to whom the government in Scotland defers, there he is at the foot of the president. Now, this is what they call in the communications business dreadful PR, because it will be used and in some cases abused by many people, because it does speak to a deeper truth. And the deeper truth is that it would seem that Starmer has very odd views. He reminds me of one of those middle managers who defers to people in more senior positions to such a degree that he brown noses. And you've all come across these guys, and there are very few women who do this, but oh my, there's so many guys who are guilty of this. They manage upwards terribly well. They're tolerant. They're open-minded. They can't do enough for the boss. However, they're absolute terrors for people who report to them. And you get a whiff of that in the relationship with Scotland. Here he is, right, without being asked, diving at somebody's feet in order to pick up some papers. This is, by the way, out of camera here, you can't see this. Outside the photograph, there's scores of minions, right? People around there, advisors, any of them could have come across in short space of time and picked up all these papers. But no, our esteemed Prime Minister decided that this was a job for him. Now, this is the guy who tells Scots, you're not going to have a referendum. You see my point about managing down? The exact opposite of the way they manage up, right? So maybe there's a key in this. There's a symbolism that says, if he thinks you're more powerful than him, this is the treatment you get. If he thinks you're less powerful, then the other treatment is dished out. Anyway, let's move on a little bit. I want to show you another. This is a cartoon from the Times, and we call it Decided but Undecided. I'm indebted, by the way, to Morton Moreland of the Times for this today. When I saw it, it reminded me so much of the quote from Churchill. Churchill, who had many flaws as well as some virtues, had a real gift for the succinct phrase. This was about someone else, but heavens, it could very much apply to our Prime Minister. He said, here he is, this is the quote, decided only to be undecided, or resolved to be irresolute, adamant for drift, solid for fluidity, and all-powerful to be impotent. That pretty much sums it up. This is what happens if, it seems to me, if you have no moral code. You end up like this because you don't know what the right thing to do is. you're sort of pretty much driven by your advisors. They tell you, right, this is morality. You ought to know that. That ought to be clear to you. If you're in any sort of activity where you have an influence on other people, you should instinctively know what the right thing is. You should know what you stand for, and you should know what you will not stand for. But it's clear to me, watching this guy as Prime Minister, he hasn't a clue what he stands for. And he has less of an idea what he shouldn't stand for. Anybody who's witnessed his recent activities in the Middle East, I mean, honestly, it almost leaves me speechless. But anyway, here we are. Let's move on, and let me introduce our guest tonight, because I really don't want to get into any more of her time. I'd like you all to welcome Mairianna Clyde, Dr. Mairianna Clyde, who is an expert Scottish historian. She's taught at the Open University on the subject of the history of empires. Very important, it seems to me, and so much more besides. So without any further ado, welcome Mairianna Clyde. Mairianna, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, John, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. We talked earlier about the work you do for the Open University. Why don't we start with that? Tell us a little bit about the history of empires, because a lot of people reckon that we're part of an empire here, maybe a dying empire, and maybe it makes it all the more relevant. Tell us what the course is about.
Well, and I have recently given up doing that course, but I can tell you what it's about. It starts by asking, first of all, what is an empire exactly?
Just carry on. I need to do something. Just carry on, please.
Yeah, so we look at what an empire is, what it constitutes, how it develops, and then finally how it ends, how decolonization happens. So something happening there in the background.
No, it's okay. It's what they call an unexpected delivery.
All right. Okay.
Somebody has decided this time of night that the most important thing in their life is to deliver something.
Yeah.
You tell me. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah, so I was just describing roughly what the course covers, and we look at a variety of empires, including the Chinese Empire and the Russian Empire, the Mughal Empire in India, and we try to identify the common features that are involved in empires, which you will recognize in the relationship between the UK and Scotland as well. So also, my area of expertise was really Scottish history, but I got involved in this because there are not many jobs in Scottish history, and I found it really quite enriching to understand some of the dynamics that are at play in the history of empires and how that plays out today, for example. So so I mean,
I'm interested in what you said there about there isn't a lot of, you didn't say there wasn't a lot of demand for Scottish history, but not places for Scottish history?
No, there's not very many academic jobs in Scottish history.
Oh.
It's a very small field.
Why is that?
It just is.
It's
quite. I mean, there are more graduates of Scottish history than there are jobs. That's the situation.
Is that because there's no demand amongst students to learn about Scottish history, or is it the universities are not able to respond to that demand?
No, the demand is there. The demand is being met, but all universities are facing great strains and cutbacks. You've probably heard about Edinburgh University trying to cut back on staff at the moment.
Yeah.
A crisis in Aberdeen and Dundee as well, all over. So it's just that's the situation that we're in. Yeah.
Oh, it's very sad, because you would like to think that a country which wished to re-establish itself, if that's the right term, would commit a lot of resources to dealing with its history to make sure as many people as possible understood that history and were able to deal with it meaningfully. It just strikes me as slightly bizarre You know, I understand there's pressure on universities. I do accept that. Maybe this is part of a bigger question, which we'll probably come on to later, about the financing of Scotland and how that works, or more commonly doesn't work. You know? But you've been interested in independence for a long time now. What is your impression of where the independence movement is going right now?
It's stuck. It's completely stuck. I think you know, we've arrived at a situation where you know, support for independence seems to be about 54%. But it's not necessarily the thing that is most important to people. We're back in the same sort of territory that we were really before we even had the parliament, where, I mean, any time from the 1950s onwards, when you ask people, what do you think we should have home rule or whatever, you would probably find a majority said yes. And then if you ask them, well, how important is that to you? And they'd probably put it about number 4 or 5. So they'd probably put jobs, housing, cost of living crisis today. These are the kind of issues which are probably most pressing. And I think where we you know, we're in a situation where we're trying to persuade the UK government to give us more powers, but they've absolutely refused to do so. And I was very interested in the attempts that the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group are trying to do in going to the UN and having Scotland declared as a candidate for decolonisation. So I was watching some of the interviews there, some of the speeches that were given a couple of weeks ago with some interest, particularly the input from Robert Black, QC, you know, KC, his contribution and his conclusion that that Scotland, in an international law sense, was extinguished in 1707. That if you look at what actually happened, I mean, it really doesn't come as any surprise to me as a historian that it's an incorporating union. That was what, at the time, people complained about. They said, why does it have to be an incorporating union? But it was because the English side, the English commissioners, that's what they insisted on. And the Scots seemed to have no ability to change it otherwise.
Maybe that ability was conditioned by, um, what can I say, inducements.
It was a variety of things. One of the things was that the commissioners that were chosen for each side, they met in the cockpit in London, the English side in one room and the Scots in another. But the commissioners that were chosen by the Crown and not by the parliaments. So it was the Crown which was forcing this through. And the Crown was concerned about the possibility of Scotland becoming a backdoor to France because of the exiled Stuarts and the danger that posed, and the ambitions of Louis XIV and the strength of the French on the continent, and the War of the Spanish Succession, which threatened France becoming a kind of continental superpower, which was obviously Catholic. So they were very, very concerned that there should not be a Stuart restoration via Scotland, because there was still a lot of strong support for the Stuarts in Scotland at the time. So this became all of more of a crisis when Queen Anne's last child died, the Duke of Gloucester. I think that was 1700 or 1701. So she had no more heirs. It was unlikely to have any more children. And so therefore the English Parliament, English government cast about thinking about, well, who would be an heir? And they alighted on the heirs of Sophia, the Electress of Hanover.
Yeah.
Who was the mother of George I. Sophia had died by the time that Anne died in 1714. So it was George I, her son, who eventually became the king. But the Scots didn't mention anything. They left the whole issue open. And historians are of the view that they did so deliberately because they wanted to have put some pressure on the English to negotiate to get a better deal for Scotland than they had had in recent years. So that's the kind of scenario in which the Scots at last had some pressure points that they could put on the English ministers of the Crown to be a bit fairer to Scotland, but the English also had their terms too. And one of them was that they wanted to definitively put an end to any kind of a possibility of a Stuart restoration in Scotland, which would be friendly to France. The old pretender was currently living in France, courtesy of the French king. And I think it was around 1701, around the same time as Queen Anne's last child died, that the Louis XIV declared the old pretender as he recognised him as the heir to the British throne.
So
So
two
that
things come to mind. One is that the Scottish Parliament must have endorsed the work of the commissioners.
I don't think they did.
Really?
Well, they didn't have a sort of system of politics like we have today, obviously, but there were basically two parties. There was the court party, and they were the ones that were appointed by the Crown and were for the Crown's interest. And then there was the country party, which was kind of the opposition, which was standing up for, well, people who weren't the court, for the rest of the country. And the leader of that party in Scotland was the Duke of Hamilton. He was the lead peer in Scotland, and he was supposedly the leader of this opposition. And he was an odd kind of character. And at some point, he seems to have been turned because he dropped his opposition to the Crown making the choice of the commissioners. This is a mystery that I have not solved as to why he did that. But he did decide in the end that he was quite okay with the Crown appointing their own commissioners. But it wasn't completely full safe, because actually one of the commissioners that was appointed was George Locker of Carnwarth, whom you've maybe heard of. He was a young guy at the time, and he owed his position on that commission to his uncle, who was his English uncle, who managed to get him a position. And he later wrote a series of memoirs about that. And it's largely through his writings that we know all about the kind of skullduggery that went on, because he was actually playing for the other side, but at the same time. So, and it was so dangerous that his memoirs weren't published for well over, I think, over 100 years after he died. I mean, that's how secret they
Yeah.
were. So there were a number of inducements, both carrot and stick, given to the Scots to get online, and basically you probably heard about this, that they introduced this thing called the Aliens Act.
Yeah.
In 1705, and this went that if the Scots hadn't agreed to enter into negotiations for a union by, I think it was December 1705 or something like that, I think that was the date, then there would be no, Scotsmen would cease to be naturalised Englishmen in England. In other words, they would be locked out of any kind of trade, overland trade. Now, given that we had already been locked out of foreign trade by the Navigation Acts, the English Navigation Acts, we couldn't trade with the colonies, in America. And because the country, the England we're talking about here, really, the English crown aspect was at war with France over the war, the war of the Spanish Succession. It meant that our shipping, such as it was at risk. They could be seized. There was no such thing as the Royal Navy to protect your shipping. So effectively our foreign trade was stymied. And with introducing this Aliens Act, it meant that our cross-border trade, overland trade, was also stymied. So we were really in a bind, in terms of the trade of the country and the economy of the country at the time.
There are parallels here with the United States. I mean, the British government went down the same route with the United States. They said, You have to buy our tea, you have to be taxed on it. This is compulsory, it's a legal requirement. The Americans reacted very differently to the Scots. They said, if there's a tax on the tea, you can have it back, and they threw it in the harbour in Boston. But they also did other things. They aligned with the French in order to ensure that they could keep on shipping, as it were. What I'm rather suggesting is, no, it would have been much, much more difficult. There were avenues that could have been explored if the will had been there, it seems to me. Maybe not with quite the same ease that the Americans had, because they had the advantage of distance, but they also had the disadvantage of distance. If you have the French as an ally, they can't respond tomorrow morning. You're talking about 6 weeks. But in the end, the Americans prevailed. I just wonder how much of this is down to attitude and how much of it is down to the practicalities of it.
It was down to the practicalities of it. I mean, one of the things I discovered was that the City Council of Edinburgh, the Borough Council of Edinburgh in 1705, 1706, was so worried about the situation that they ordered in new supplies of gunpowder from Holland. Mm-hmm. So they were obviously expecting that if we didn't agree to this, or there could be trouble one way or another. They were obviously worried about that. And I think that might have been one of the things that turned Hamilton, was the thought that, like, well, if I don't go along with this, they're going to invade us, and we really don't need that right now, on top of everything else. We don't have we don't want another civil war. We don't want an English invasion. We don't want we don't want to be invaded and then conquered in the way that Cromwell had earlier.
Was it always a binary choice like that, or because negotiations, if that term means anything, it doesn't necessarily mean that one side capitulates. Negotiations mean that it's a two-way street, surely.
Well, that's how they met in the cockpit, and they went through a series of articles, of which they then drew up. And then the articles were presented to each parliament one by one. So some of the articles were more popular or unpopular than others. And this is how they did it, in installments like that, until the final article was wound up. And that's how the process worked. But essentially, one of the things that the Scots got out of that was that there would be a single market, and we would have access to the British single market, and we would have the protection of the Royal Navy. This is the English Royal Navy, because we didn't really have much of a navy in Scotland. Yeah. So one of the aspects that I've wondered about, because James IV was, remember, he had the Yellow Caravel and the Great Michael. He was the one who really was starting to get interested in building up a Scottish navy at the same time as Henry VIII was as well. But navies were incredibly expensive in those days. The English navy was not really anywhere either in the 16th century, and neither was the Danish navy to speak of. I mean, in fact, there's an interesting aside here that the Christian IV Denmark, he was the brother-in-law of James VI. He was, James VI was married to Anna of Denmark. And he seems to have developed quite a friendship with James VI and first, to the extent that he actually employed, he contacted James about his flagship, said, I'm interested in getting a flagship made. Could you send me over some naval architects? So it was Scottish naval architects that built Christian IV's flagship, the Tre Cluna. And it came sailing into London, I think, about 1608 or sometime like that, the first decade of the 17th century. So, and there was an item in the Danish Royal Archives about expenditure for a Scottish sea captain from Dunbar, someplace. That was where our ship were. To go and see and make contact with the Greenlanders, because nobody had heard from them for about a century. I mean, nobody knew whether they were there or not. So this Scottish captain got the job, the franchise, to go sailing off to Greenland and see if he could see anybody.
Mm.
But apparently he got as far as Greenland. We just have to take his word for it, I suppose. But what he said was that it was all fog bound and he couldn't make landing and he came back again. But anyway, he got paid for it. But it shows you that the state of the Danish, maritime power at that point was also pretty.
Well, the Dutch
Weak.
pretty powerful in terms of
Yes.
seafaring.
Oh yes, yes.
Didn't they
I
one
mean,
time
in fact,
didn't they one time they sailed up the Thames and
yeah.
created mayhem?
Oh, that the Dutch were in their glory in the 17th century. I mean, they developed these really, really fast ships, and they were able to get to the East Indies, to Jakarta, and all these places much quicker than anybody else. And basically, they just took over the Portuguese Empire. They just kicked,
Yeah.
their simple method was
Yeah.
just to kind of attack a Portuguese fort, take it over, and take over their trade. Simples.
Very Dutch, isn't it? I mean, I gather that they did all of this because of spice, and that
Yeah,
at
yeah,
one time spice was more valuable than gold,
yeah,
which
yeah,
is extraordinary when you think of it. But then again, if you're living off sort of half rotten meat, a little bit of pepper goes a long way, I suppose, and a bit of nutmeg. I don't know.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they swapped. Was it they swapped at one point? Didn't they swap New Amsterdam, New York, for one island in the Southeast Asia that had nutmeg?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was the deal,
probably
was it?
did. They swapped it.
Extraordinary,
They swapped it
absolutely
at some point.
extraordinary.
Yeah,
See if you can go back in time. You think, gracious, fancy selling New York for a nutmeg tree or a couple of nutmeg trees. But then again, and
yeah.
of
Well, I
course, the
mean,
Dutch invented the joint stock company,
yeah,
which enabled them to spread the risk. So you had a financial basis on which to move forward.
mm,
Because if you and I decide that we want to build a ship to go to Java or wherever, and it doesn't come back, then we're ruined. However, if we spread the risk, then perhaps it unfortunately doesn't come back. And many of them didn't, I gather. At least we've got something to fall back on, and we can perhaps invest in another ship. I don't know, but at least you've got choices there. Quite a clever mechanism if you think about it. So
mm,
here we are. The Scots were faced with, as somebody said, the English army was poised at the border. There was all sorts of threats, the Alien Act and the other acts, and all of that, and therefore there was a tremendous pressure on the commissioners to agree to a deal.
mm.
And
Yeah,
they eventually succumbed, and they agreed to this deal, and they signed up for an incorporating union, which, as you say, is very different to any other union because it specifically prescribes the particular kind of union.
yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that the English were just so worried that if Scotland, basically, they didn't want anything from us in terms of like there wasn't anything here that we had that they wanted. What they wanted was our political obedience.
Yeah,
That's all. They did not want us to be having a kind of foreign policy that would be different from theirs. But, since the Reformation, in a way, that kind of realignment had been taking place anyway. Um, as another Protestant country, that we were more kind of, in some ways, more aligned with England than we
yeah,
had been, say, with France, which was a Catholic country, and that was still a division. And the Scots, at that time, I mean, the country was divided, between the Jacobite side and the other.
mm,
But they weren't Catholics, they were Episcopalians, but there was tremendous division culturally
mm,
within Scotland. That was another problem at the
yeah,
time.
yeah.
But I
You
mean,
said
what is
earlier that you felt that Scotland was at an impasse, uh, not sure where to go. Uh, and the difficulty, if you're in an impasse or you appear to be at an impasse, it's very disabling as far as the voters are concerned. It seems to me, because voters like certainty,
oh
they like
yeah.
clarity, they like forcefulness. Anyone
Mm,
who's ever watched Farage, I mean, Farage just dumps the facts to one side and says, "Look, this is all about me projecting this air of authority." it seems to me the Scottish government, and I apologise if I've got this wrong, but my sense of it is that the Scottish government projects exactly the opposite image. In other words, we're here, we're happy to be abused at any time because that's the way the thing's set up. We can't do anything about it. We just have to live with it. Do you think I'm completely wrong in that view?
Well, I've been talking to a number of people about this recently, and what we've kind of agreed is that we really need to kind of be a lot more bullish. We need to kind of pick fights if we have to. And we figured that as long as we pick a fight that the public would get behind, something that would be popular. I mean, like taking on the energy giants or something like that, where everybody say, "Oh yeah, we need to get control of energy." If we were to sort of pick a fight like that it wouldn't really matter whether we won or lost, because as long as we gave it laldy and the public could see that, that would do. But I mean, I think there have been. I mean, I've heard Kate Forbes recently demand or say that the Internal Market Act should be abolished. We could shout about that, sort of say, this was introduced by the previous administration, the Tory administration. It's totally against the devolution settlement. I mean, the whole point of devolution was that Scotland to be able to do things differently. For an economic sense, to improve the economics here. So why are so she did make that case. I don't know that it got any airtime.
I think this is the point. I think this is the point, Mairianna, is that I hear ministers say almost weekly the same sort of rhetoric. I deplore. This is disgraceful.
Yeah.
This is a complete rejection of what was before. But the folks in Westminster don't care about I deplore. I'm upset. Who cares if nobody at Westminster cares if you're upset. They would only care if they were upset. And I don't see anything happening that makes anyone in Westminster the slightest bit inconvenienced. As long as people stand up on a public platform and say, I deplore, that's a way of saying I'm going to do nothing about it. That's it. That's the way it sounds. And it sounds that way to the electorate. Deplore is not the same as this is what I'm going to do about it. It's like half a meal. I've put the plate in front of you, but I haven't put anything on it. But I did give you the plate. I don't need the damn plate. I want you to put some meat on it. I want you to tell me what you're going to do about this.
Well, Farage can't.
My big worry is this, and I want to share this with you and everyone else. I listened to John Swinney saying all the things he was planning to do in terms of a better Scotland, and I applaud all of that and more. The trouble is it's all predicated upon somebody in Westminster saying it's okay and pulling the plug or not, as they care. I mean, it struck me as a slightly bizarre thing to do. It's like a hostage to fortune. Imagine I'm sitting in Westminster and one of my advisors brings this John Swinney speech and says, look, this is what they're doing in Scotland. It's getting a bit of traction. That's okay, just pull the plug. Simple as that. And then somebody in Scotland stands up and says, we had this great idea. It's been completely scotched, if you'll excuse the pun, and I deplore. And we're back to the same old business again. That's very unappealing to the electorate, who are desperate for change. So where do you think this change is going to come from?
Well, I mean, I think it has to come from the grassroots. I mean, I think, you mentioned Farage. I mean, he makes all sorts of claims and he can't back them up either. He's got no power, but he gets airtime, and that's his power. He seems to be able to create the political weather just by the kind of outrageous things he does and getting his face on the telly just all the time. And we don't. I mean, I think that one of the things that Alex Salmond was very good at was getting the media attention. Apparently, he used to go around all the studios in a taxi, sort of said, "Hello, this is Alex Salmond here. I've got a comment about such and such. I mean, I'm available for an interview. I'm just right outside your door." And that kind of thing. And he was an expert at kind of just the cheeky sort of and been able to I mean, he knew he had facts at his fingertips, and he was a good entertainer, you know, in terms of just being able to
Yeah,
do that.
I think
In
that's
fact,
a good that's a good example,
yeah,
Marianne.
and he
The
could
way
create
things are
waves
set
in
up
that way.
and the devolution settlement, the way things were set up was
Mm,
very straightforward. There was to be a Scottish executive, and for many years that's what it was called.
mm-hmm.
Alex Salmond said, "No, it's going to be called the
The
Scottish
Scottish
Parliament."
government,
He
and
went
now
ahead and
people
did
think
it.
it's a government, and it's
You know,
not. It's a Scottish
he didn't
executive.
say, "I deplore the fact that this is called the Scottish Executive." He went out and changed it. And
Yeah,
he dared them to come to him. And they looked
yeah.
at it and said, "We don't give a rat's ass, frankly. I mean, you can call it what you like." But that's what happens. You push the envelope. What you don't do is sit there in what I term learned helplessness. Don't do
Mm,
that, because
mm.
effectively you give the argument away as soon as you do that. You have to sound as if you're assertive. It seems to me. Got a question
Well,
here. Somebody is asking uh, because they're very interested in what you're saying, and they're saying, "Are you on X?" In other words, can they follow you on X?
yeah, you can. I'll need to sort of change my things to sort of not being private to not being to being more public.
Yeah, okay,
But I'm on Blue Sky.
okay. And by the way, before gets mistaken, I'm not advocating civil unrest. What I am advocating is a civil response that's not apathetic. And because I don't think that gets you anywhere. I think you have to do like Alex Salmond did and just go ahead and do it and challenge them.
Mm.
It's interesting. If you live in other countries, what's very common is people do something uh, which is out of kilter with what the authorities want, and then they apologize afterwards because they don't suffer from this learned helplessness. And their position is, I'm always going to be assertive, and I'll let the other person come back and tell me that it's not acceptable.
Well, to get back to Alex Salmond, I mean, he renamed the Scottish Executive the Scottish Government, and I'm not sure that he did us any favours, because now people think we've got a government. We
Oh
don't
yeah,
have
I
a
agree with
government.
that. Yeah,
We've
yeah,
got a devolved assembly.
yeah,
And devolution is not revolution. I mean, I'm sorry, it's devolution is not independence. It
yeah,
cannot deliver transformative change.
yeah.
It just can't. And people need to be able to accept that fact and be angry about it
Hmm.
and sort of say, you know, we need more powers than we have. I mean, we
It,
can't
it,
thrive without the powers of independence. SNP have been making that argument, of course, but of course it's not, it doesn't get any traction whatsoever with the media.
well, I don't think it's going to get any traction if it's coupled with deplore. That's my point. If I say to you what you've just said to me, Marianna, is I deplore and I wish things were different. You can say to me, well, you can deplore to the end of time, John, but I'm going to carry on saying what I'm going to say,
Yeah.
and I would accept that because
Mhm.
I'm not changing anything.
Yeah.
I'm giving all of my power to you to decide my future, and I
Mm.
think as long as you're in that position and you're non-assertive, you'll be
Mm.
treated like a serf. You know,
Mm.
it's not a level playing field. So if you hope to compete, you have to be assertive. You
Mm.
know, if you're the little guy, you know, you'll just be treated a little guy unless you step up to the plate. It seems to me. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but I don't know. It just seems to me to be a.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm all for sort of a leader being more bullish, but I also think that people have to play to their strengths, and I don't think that is John Swinney's strength. I mean, his strength is he's a very polite, civil, fair-minded, decent man. Now,
yeah.
that may not build a revolution. But we need somebody who maybe is more bullish, but I can't really think of whom. Maybe Stephen Flynn would be more bullish. But you remember, like you can fall flat on your face as well. I mean, just consider the acts which were rolled back, I mean, particularly the deposit return scheme.
Mm,
You know, that was just sheer spite. I mean, there was
of
no
course,
reason why that couldn't go ahead.
but
You know,
that's my point.
but it wasn't an issue that, you know, we tried to fight it, but it's not something that people get excited about. You know what I mean? It would have been a useful thing to do, but it's not something that people are going to storm barricades over because we didn't have a bottle return scheme. But if we can find something like that we could do, that the public would get behind, and we could defy them. But I'm really scratching my head what that could be, because you
But,
saw the ease with which that was crushed, and that was
well,
a nothing. Do you
of
know what I
course, it
mean?
was a nothing. But that's what happens if you're not assertive. That you
Mm,
get crushed. I mean, that's my exact point. Is if you're non-assertive, you get crushed each and every time because the system is based on bullying. But you can't be a bully if the other person squares up to you. It just doesn't happen that way, because the other person then says, "Look, I don't want to do that because I'll get into trouble, or that these people are going to create problems for me." Nobody creates problems, it seems to me.
mm.
I mean, they just don't. The very act of managing competently actually puts you on the other side of being assertive, it seems to me.
Well, I mean, this is the curse of middle management throughout the years, isn't it? I mean, it's responsibility without power.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, and it's the fact that John Swinney and the SNP government feel responsible. They feel responsible for the NHS, for all the budgets that they have got to do, and they don't want to imperil that in any way. So they're trying to do their best with what limited powers they have. But I feel that we should have a mature adult conversation with the electorate saying, look, we're really stumped with devolution, that
Precisely.
it doesn't serve our interests.
But
And I mean,
explain this to me then. Explain this to me, because you're a member of the SNP, right?
mm,
I saw something the other day that confused the heck out of me.
mm,
And it's this. The SNP announced on day one, if I can use that term, that there was no need for a constitutional convention of all the parties to get together and
mm,
discuss
mm,
the constitutional future of Scotland.
mm,
But then I'm looking at all the parties getting together with John Swinney, and they're talking about bits and pieces of it. And I'm thinking, why are you dealing? It's like, I've got all of this. I've got a whole house to clean, right? But but I'm not going to deal with the roof. Why not? Well, because the other guys might not like me talking about the roof. No, you have to deal with the roof. I'm sorry. That's where the rain comes in.
yeah,
You can't. It was like, I don't want to. We don't want to deal with the elephant in the room. Let's leave that to one side and let's talk about other stuff here. I'm mixing my metaphors now, but I think you know what I mean. You
yeah.
know, I think the electorate find that very confusing.
Yeah, they
They
do.
say,
I mean, that was what the Smith Commission said. I mean, he said that. He said people don't understand devolution. They
yeah,
don't understand why, especially Alex Salmond calling the Scottish Executive the Scottish government. People think, oh, we've got a government in Scotland. Why is the government in Scotland not doing what governments do?
yeah.
Because it's not a government; it's a devolved
Okay,
administration.
let me give you another example then. Broadcasting in Scotland is a shambles,
Mm,
right?
absolutely.
We have a broadcaster based in Glasgow that spends apparently £300 million a year.
Mm,
Goodness knows on what,
mm,
because it isn't on decent editors. It isn't
yep,
on decent interviews. It's not.
yep,
It's the very opposite. They squander this 300 million, and they are, by in the minds of many people, they are very hostile to the Scottish government, and particularly the SNP.
mm,
The SNP just shrugs and says, well, something, broadcasting has devolved. We can't do anything about that. But hold on a second, guys. Where is the future? It's not in broadcasting. It's in this, what we are doing now. Why don't
mm.
you take some of the money you've got, which
Yes,
the Scottish government conferred, which the Scottish people conferred upon you, don't give any of it to the SNP, don't go on their broadcasts, come and broadcast like this. We're asking all the time for government ministers to come on the show
yeah,
and
yeah,
tell us, but this is it, it's free. You don't
yeah,
have to convince me. I'm already convinced. Come on the damn show, right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, what's the problem?
Yeah,
I just don't get it.
I share
They
your
will traipse
frustrations.
off,
Yeah,
and they will traipse off the broadcasting house, or whatever the heck it's called in Glasgow, right? And beg and borrow to get a couple of minutes, along with 16 other people, to talk about Scotland and their vision for it. Nonsense.
mm,
Junk it all. Let them spend the £300 million on interviewing Tories every 10 seconds, if that's what they want to do. But the longer you involve yourself in this nonsense,
mm,
the more people are confused,
mm.
because it looks like you are supporting this nonsense. right? Come on this show.
Mm.
Anybody can come on this show,
Mm.
right? You know, literally anybody. And
Mm.
come and tell the Scottish people how you feel about things. I mean, if I've got it wrong, come on and tell me. I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. I'd love for some government ministers to get up off their backsides. They don't have to go anywhere. Frankly, they can do
No.
it from home. They don't have to go. They don't
Yeah.
have to go to some studio, right?
Yeah.
It'll cost them nothing. If they want to record it, we'll record it, for crying out loud. I mean, this is not, you know, look at Kevin's crowdfunder,
Mm.
1955 out of 6,500,
Mm.
right? And he's working his posterior off
Mm.
every day and every hour of every day to bring independence-related issues to people. And yet, what support does he get? Zero.
Mm.
So don't go traipsing along to the BBC. Come along and come on any of Kevin's shows.
Mm.
He'd love to have you there. That's the
Mm.
message I'd like to get out to the SNP, if you're in a
Yeah.
position to talk about it to anybody. They're very welcome, you know, very, very welcome.
Well, I'm just a very small cog in a very big machine, I guess. But I mean, I certainly, that's my position, is that I really feel that the wider economic, the wider Yes movement really needs to sort of
Yeah,
marshal its resources and work together. And what is really despairing me is the bitterness that is broken up between various sections. I mean, I'll talk to anybody that if you're for independence, you know, I'm for you. That's really my position. And I believe a lot. You know, there are old Viking laws, John. I don't know if you know about them, but they're really pretty good. But one of them is always use various methods of attack.
yes.
Right, and that's what I see, the diversity that is occurring in the independence movement. I mean, I mentioned the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group, and then there's the Scottish Currency Group, and then there's an energy group.
Ooh,
I mean, they're all sort of things that are actually happening,
yeah,
on the fringes, and there is a kind of, I mean, I think in the paper that Alf Baird gave, he was talking about he was referring to Fanon, and his analysis of how the Algerian revolution had come about and brought about a decolonization, and he
ooh,
talked about how, well, it's not actually a very good comparison because Algeria was a and it's
yeah,
still a mess, right? They all just fell apart, hating each other and, fighting each other. But, his wider point was that there was as the independence movement gained some kind of foothold, it started to, you might call it fracturing.
yeah,
I would call it diversification. And you can see the same in other cases. I mean, in India, for example, there were various different groups who had their own competing visions of things, but it all helped to bring a kind of momentum.
yeah.
So I feel kind of encouraged in that sense. And I've always felt, John, that it has to come from the grassroots.
Mm.
There has to be a grassroots movement, and we in Scotland have got to get off our backsides as well and
That's
stop
the
thinking
key.
hoping oh, well, maybe we should get the council to do something about it, or maybe
Yeah,
like John Swinney
yeah.
should do
This
something about it.
is
I
nonsense.
mean, you just have to,
That's nonsense.
if you want to get something, you do it yourself.
Of course you do.
Independence is something, freedom
But,
is something you take for yourself. It's not
but
something that's handed to you on a plate.
it's
You have to take it.
it's
You have to get off your backside and take it. And
exactly.
it has to come from everybody. And
Yeah.
I understand how depressed people are and disorientated. I do understand that. But I think I'm seeing hope in all these kind of little developments that are
Well,
happening. And I
let me
just
just say
hope,
one thing. It's
yeah,
this. All the people you mentioned have been on the show.
yeah,
Every single person that you mentioned just now in the organisations, pretty much, have been on the show.
yeah,
What happened when we invite government ministers?
yeah, they don't come.
Angus Robertson.
Yeah.
I said, would you like to come on the show and talk about Constitution? He's the minister for the
Okay,
Constitution.
thank you.
And he
Sorry,
said,
somebody just posted something up.
he said, no, it's not something I want to do. That shouldn't be a voluntary thing, right? If you're the minister for the Constitution, I'm not sure he is anymore, by the way. I've never heard anything about the Constitution from the SNP
Yeah,
for months.
yeah,
Now they've scrapped the Constitutional Convention. I don't know what's happening. But the reality is, if you're the minister for the Constitution and we're offering you an hour to talk to people about the Constitution, you should jump at the chance. You shouldn't say, Oh, it's not something I want to do. Why
Mm.
not? What's so special about you that you stand aloof?
Mm.
I mean, the SNP is not in a position to stand aloof. They're in a
Mm.
position where they should be doing the sort of things that you're recommending, which is get
Mm.
out there, get your hands dirty, and start making things happen for people. Because if
Mm.
you don't, people like Farage are going to come along with all of this nonsense and say, I'm going to change for you. Look what happened the last time people were offered change. They voted Labour. Why? Not because they expected to get change, because they were the only people offering change. Right? I mean, it was all a nonsense. They knew it was a nonsense, but they voted for it because they said, you guys don't want change. You want devolution. I don't
Mm.
want devolution.
Mm.
Why should I
Devolution,
vote for you?
devolution was Labour's project, and we've ended up doing Labour's dirty work for them.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
I
what
mean,
happens.
there was in the 1990s. I mean, I was there. I remember it all. I mean, there was a whole a section of the SNP, you know, the fundamentalists, as they called us, that wouldn't have anything to do with devolution. As they said, it's a trap. You know, it's a dead end. And I think they've been proved right, you know, that we've got to this situation. Although you have to ask yourself, imagine if we didn't have a Scottish government, such it
Yeah,
is. I mean, because I do think that the SNP in the 17 years that they have been in power have made Scotland a better place. They've
I
made it a
agree.
kinder
I
place.
agree.
There's a lot that we've done that we never
Yeah,
get any credit for.
I
I
agree.
mean, they have, you know, it has been proven quite consistently that
I
child
agree.
poverty in Scotland is lower in Scotland now than the
Yeah,
rest of the UK, when
I
it used to
agree.
always be higher. You
I
know, I
agree
mean,
with that
there's
completely.
free education. There's young people under 22 can use the buses for free. I mean,
Yeah,
that's got to be worth a certain amount of. I mean, that's like a pay rise, isn't it? You can use the
absolutely.
buses for free. So I mean, there's so
Nothing,
much.
nothing I've said tonight is critical of the the measures that the Scottish government over the years has taken. And I
Mm,
agree with you completely.
mm,
These measures are absolutely critical, and I commend them for it. What I do not commend them for is they jumped into the trap. They didn't have to jump into the trap. They
mm,
could have put one foot in it and kept the other foot free by
yeah.
insisting at every single juncture on independence. But
Mm.
instead of that, they've jumped into the trap with both feet. When somebody says to me, right, that a party in favour of constitutional change doesn't want to discuss the constitution, that tells me what sort of party they are, I'm afraid.
Well,
And then
I'm not party to these discussions at that high level, but if I could hazard a guess, I do recollect when Nicola Sturgeon became First Minister, and some of the first speeches she gave. I mean, this is the situation. In 2012, Alex Salmond and David Cameron signed the Edinburgh Agreement, which said that they would have a referendum and each would respect the result.
yeah,
Right. So a referendum was held in 2014, and the answer was no. The Scottish people, as Jim Sillars keeps saying, were sovereign for about 12 hours on that
mhm,
day, on the 18th of September,
yeah.
and they looked at it and they said, do you know what? I think I'll not bother. You
I
know,
don't,
we
I
we
don't blame the electorate. I really
we
don't.
chickened out. No, I mean, I know. I mean, I felt angry
No,
at the time, but going back, you look at like all the threats and all the kind of disinformation and all the rest of it. They were bullied and cowed into sort of saying no. But when you're faced with that situation, and an agreement has been signed whereby, you know, we will respect the result, and then Nicola Sturgeon becomes First Minister, she, I think, was trying to appeal to the ones that voted no. I mean, you remember in the general election in 2015, she said, lend us your votes.
hmm,
You know, she was sort of, and I think she was trying to reach out to and try and persuade them with sort of competent government that, you know, you could trust the SNP. So it was of its time, but I mean, I agree with you now. I mean, it's been like what, it's been 11 years now. I mean,
yeah.
that's almost a generation. So I think that we have to step on the gas.
I think I'm not sure the SNP has any option now, frankly. Well, they do have an option. What will happen is that some entity, some party, some grouping, because remember, Farage is riding high in the opinion polls. It's
Mm.
not a party; it's a limited company. For crying out
Exactly.
loud,
I know, you know,
anybody could.
I said that to like the disgruntled SNP voter, you know, when I was canvassing in the
Hmm,
autumn, and she was thinking about voting for reform. I said, "What are you voting for reform for? They're against independence." She said, "Do you understand that like it's a private limited company owned by Nigel Farage?" And she said, "Well, I think we've got to try something different."
yes, you see.
It's just
people are desperate for change.
they are desperate. I get
They're
that.
desperate for change, and
They
what
are
they're being
desperate.
offered is
Yeah,
change with a very small c. They want
yeah,
change with a capital C. Now,
yeah,
whether that's a good thing for them or not, I don't know, but that's
yeah.
what they want. And somebody in the SNP should be doing the research.
They are, I think. Yeah.
And the research, I expect, I'll do it. If they don't want to do it, I'll do it. And the research, I suspect, will tell them they want a capital C type change. They don't want this small c change because they know where that takes them. It's taken them it's taken the SNP 17 years to get there, which is a dead end.
Mm.
And they have to do something about the dead end. You can't go to the electorate and say, vote again for a dead end. It's not going to work. And you and I both know that. I mean, it's
Well,
not going to work.
I believe that there is to be a renewed focus on independence that in the next phase of that, and John Swinney will be speaking about that in National Council on Saturday. So I believe.
Well, I hope and pray that the first sentence he says is that it, constitutional change it isn't the sole exclusive property of the SNP. We need to take lots of people with us. So
Yes.
therefore, we'll renew our plans for a constitutional convention, and it will be held before the end of the year. And it will include as many people as wish to respond to the invitation. That's what you should say. One sentence, that's all he has to say. Because in saying that one sentence, he will put the SNP back on the rails again. If he goes down a flim-flam route of saying, well, we have to be careful, we have to make sure that Westminster doesn't get too upset too quickly about our plans, so therefore we need to move along very gradually. As soon as you use the word gradual, you're effectively saying to the other guy, don't worry, I'm not serious about this. You need to be serious about it. And I would suggest that if you're there at the National Council, and you hear the sort of soft soap about we're in favour of constitutional change without actually wanting constitutional change, because that's what it means. And Elliot Bulmer, I thought, was very eloquent when he talked on the show about the need for change and the need for substantial change. And he was even prepared to concede secure autonomy at that point. It's not everyone agrees with that either. But you need to make some major change to the Constitution, and you have to say to the other guy, I'm not going to cooperate until you do this. Right now, we're cooperating and get nothing for it. It seems to me. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I just thinking about the fate of the glass return scheme, and how that was knocked back, and that was like a nothing little. Well, I mean, it meant a lot to the Greens, but it's not hardly exciting stuff. But you see the ease with which that was called back. But I mean, I think we have to join forces, and amongst the wider Yes movement. And really, I think it has to come from the grassroots. The pressure has to come from the grassroots upwards, as well as from the Scottish government towards the UK government. But so yeah, fire on.
Well, we're almost out of time. I should have warned you that this thing goes very fast.
Right.
You a couple of things, and all of a sudden your whole hour is up.
You remember what Andrew Fletcher? Can I just finish with what Andrew Fletcher of Saltoun said? He said, "So shall we dance round and round forever in this trap of our own making."
Yes.
And that's what he said about the union. We will dance round and round forever in this trap of our own making, because we don't. Andrew Fletcher of Saltoun.
Andrew Fletcher, great.
Yeah.
Well, he knew what he was talking about.
Exactly. I mean, how can you, with 57 MPs, have any influence on a parliament 500 miles away?
Of course not.
So that's our dilemma.
It's not. I think it's an opportunity. I don't see anything as a problem. I see it as an opportunity. And we've got everything in front of us. We have all the tools we need. We just need to start using them. It's as simple as that. Look, this has been I've very much enjoyed you being with us. Thank you for being our guest tonight. I hope you get a lot more followers on Twitter if you're able to open up your responses and stuff. And thank you again. It's much appreciated. And all the best in your branch, and all the best.
Yeah, well, thank you for everybody who's tuned in, and maybe see you on Twitter or Blue Sky or something.
There you are. People are saying thank you, Peter Winfield. Hashbury saying thank you, Mairianna. So you're a big hit, Mairianna.
Okay.
Thank you again. And
Bye.
goodbye. Thank you again. And a big thank you to all of you for watching and listening tonight. We always hope to educate, entertain, and enlighten you as we go through on the show. I think we've achieved all of that tonight. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through each and every one, but many of them were sort of duplicated. But we got through a bunch for you in the course of the 1 hour that we've had online. So let me leave you with the thoughts I always leave you with, which is look after each other, stay safe, take care. Good night. See you next week at 7 o'clock.
Okay, good night. Thank you.